A well-regulated militia being necessary to the security of a free state, the right of the people to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed. Thanks so much for tuning in to another edition of Bearing Arms, Cam and Company. My name is Cam Edwards. Great to have you with us on the program today. I'm a little discombobulated right now. I'm wearing my hat that normally never sees the camera. This is my lawn mowing hat. This is my yard work hat. This is the hat that I wear when I'm not going to be seen. But just before I went down to the studio this morning, we got some fantastic news. I want to share it with you before we get into today's program. You know, if you are a regular viewer or listener, that for the past 4 years, my wife, Miss E, has been fighting lung cancer, and she's still here. That's the great news. But it's been a while since we've actually had some positive news about treatment that's been working. Well, we got that news today. The treatment that she's been on for the last couple of months is working. The tumors are shrinking. We don't have a lot of details. We just got a phone call from the doctor real quick, so we're going to learn more next week. But I got to tell you, we were so happy to get the news that I was all of a sudden single-mindedly focused on what was happening there, and I was all the way to the studio, and I realized, oh yeah, I'm wearing my Grody yard work hat. So apologies for that. But I know that so many of you, again, have been keeping us in your thoughts and your prayers. I want to thank you for that, really, from the bottom of my heart. You have no idea how much it means to us to know that there are individuals that we've never met, may never meet, who are keeping us in their prayers. And we just, again, cannot thank you enough. Now, on today's program, we've got some pretty big news out of the state of Florida. The Florida State Supreme Court on Thursday afternoon, 4-1 decision, rejecting a ballot proposal that would have gone before voters in 2022 to ban so-called assault weapons. The court actually said that the language that had been used by gun control advocates was misleading, was trying to mislead voters about what this ballot initiative actually would have done. So coming up in just a little bit, we're going to talk with Ryan Petty, a father of Alaina Petty, who was killed in Parkland, Florida, to get his reaction to what the Supreme Court said yesterday, and where he thinks the focus really should be in terms of, protecting students and staff at school, as well as what we can do to most effectively reduce violent crime. But I want to welcome to the program right now, Senior Vice President and General Counsel of the National Shooting Sports Foundation, Mr. Larry Keane, one of the parties, along with the National Rifle Association and Florida's Attorney General Ashley Moody, who actually challenged the language of this ballot initiative. We had the opportunity to speak with Larry earlier today to get his reaction. Take a look and a listen. Larry, thanks so much for coming on the program, sir. Great to talk to you today.
Good to see you as well, Cam. How are you?
I'm good. I'm missing baseball, but you know what? We at least got some great news out of Florida, not about spring training or anything like that, but a ballot initiative. Gun control advocates hoping to get this sweeping gun ban before voters in 2022. And the Florida State Supreme Court 4-1 decision yesterday said that the ballot language that gun control advocates had submitted was misleading to voters, and they tossed this. What can you tell us about this decision?
Yeah, it's a great victory for the Second Amendment and a stinging defeat for the gun control community, and in particular Mayor Bloomberg and his organization that's been funding really this ballot initiative. So the Florida Supreme Court ruled that this ballot initiative that would change the Florida Constitution and ban so-called assault weapons was affirmatively misleading and deceptive to voters because it would be sweep far more broadly than just, what people the gun control community typically call quote-unquote assault weapons. It would have banned virtually all semi-automatic rifles and shotguns, not just, what some try to define badly as so-called assault weapons. And it also failed to explain to the voters adequately that there was a registration requirement, and if they continued to own these firearms and not register them, they would become a criminal. So a big win for the Second Amendment and a stinging defeat from the Florida Supreme Court for the gun control community. And we were very happy to see that. NSSF submitted a brief in the case on the side of joining the arguments of the Florida Attorney General, who challenged the wording, as did NRA. So we're very, very happy. And of course, all the usual gun control groups lined up on the other side to support this ballot initiative, which again, the Florida Supreme Court said was affirmatively misleading and deceptive to voters. So that's pretty stinging language.
It really is. But, if you look at the language of the ballot initiative, I think it's also clear that the Supreme Court got this right. I mean, this was not a narrow decision. This was a 4-1 decision. And just even on the language of the grandfathering in, I mean, the ballot, the actual proposed law basically would have said, okay, if you register your quote unquote assault weapon, you can maintain possession of it. But then when you die, or if you ever want to get rid of it, it has to be destroyed. You can't pass this down to your kids. You can't sell this firearm, even though the language of the ballot initiative had made it sound like, well, if the gun is registered, then the gun is legal. And that wasn't the case at all under the terms that the gun control advocates were pushing.
Exactly, which is what made it so misleading, because it was designed to make voters think, well, I can keep what I have. That wasn't really true. You had to register it, and then, as you say, you couldn't pass it on to a family member. It would have to be destroyed. So, and this was, again, not just so-called assault rifles. This would have been virtually every semi-automatic shotgun and every semi-automatic rifle. So, duck hunting guns and things like that, and guns used for sport would have been banned completely under this language. So really a big defeat for the gun control community, a significant win for the Second Amendment, and congratulations to the Florida Attorney General, who stood up for the Second Amendment and stood up for the citizens of Florida to protect them from a deceptive and a, quote, affirmatively misleading, close quote, ballot initiative from Mayor Bloomberg and the gun control community. Yeah,
I have a feeling, by the way, Larry, that phrase affirmatively misleading is going to be referenced a lot as we talk about gun control efforts around the country, as we talk about what Michael Bloomberg is trying to do in November. I think it's important that we as gun owners also remind voters in some of these other states that the gun control movement is misleading. The gun control movement will tell you one thing, and then they'll try to do something else. You really, really have to dig in and look at the details of what these gun control advocates are proposing, because they couch it in terms of, common sense proposals and reasonable regulations when they're anything but.
That's exactly right. I mean, it's you used to originally think that they just didn't understand, but they've been at this for long enough. And, we, NRA, NSSF, others have battled, these groups on these legislation and ballot initiatives. They know what they're doing. This is purposeful. This is intentional. And it really harkens back to the comment by Josh Sugarman years ago when they coined the phrase assault weapon and he said, let's mislead the public, make them think we're banning machine guns. When we're not, we're banning semi-automatic rifles, so it'll be easier for us to get away with it, right? I'm paraphrasing, but that was the thrust of what he said. So even way back decades ago, they knew full well that they were purposely misleading the public about what their true objectives were. And, you hear these terms like common sense gun control. I think what you've seen from the gun control community in response to the pandemic and the surge in sales while people wanted to purchase firearms for lawful purposes, the way they reacted when, over 2 million new gun owners purchased firearms for the first time, they've lost a generation of fence sitters, and their hair's on fire. And their rhetoric really now displays their true objectives is to ban firearms. They're not about common sense laws or just if we could just have background checks. They don't want you to own firearms of any kind, and they'll ban whatever they can, and take whatever ground they can by any means they can, including affirmatively deceptive and misleading ballot initiatives.
Absolutely. All right, one last question before we let you go, because you referenced the number of new gun owners that we've seen just over the past few months in this country. It really is absolutely astounding. 2 million new gun owners based on the estimates of gun purchases and what we're hearing from gun store owners and things of that nature. How do you think those new gun owners will change the debate, will impact the debate and impact the vote this year? I know that we've heard a lot about people who are voting with their wallets, but we need them to vote on Election Day too. This sends a message, but if they really want to secure their freedom, they've actually got to go out and vote that way in November.
I couldn't agree more. First thing is, NSSF has been trying to communicate it with these new gun owners. They need to understand how to safely and responsibly handle, own, and use firearms. First and foremost, that's one of the reasons why it's so important for shooting ranges to remain open during the pandemic so that people could go and learn how to train safely in a safe environment, number one. Number two, you're correct. And, the anecdotal evidence that we've heard from various conversations and comments from retailers or even just discussions I've had with people is, friends, neighbors saying, hey, can I borrow a gun from you? I'm really concerned, and having to explain to them, no, because, the legislature in the state made it illegal for me to just let you borrow a rifle or a shotgun or a handgun for protection. Or people in California, for example, buying their first firearm and then being told you have to wait 10 days. And they say, what do you mean I have to wait 10 days? I'm a law-abiding citizen. This is insane. I need it now. And like realizing, and the burdens placed on law-abiding gun owners by all these laws and regulations really crystallizing for these individuals. And so we do need to engage these new gun owners to say, you've exercised your Second Amendment rights. You've seen how difficult and onerous it is. You need to become involved and defend those rights. And so we're actively working on that as well. And 40+% of the people buying firearms were first-time buyers. And that was in March, April, May, 3 record months: highest March, highest April, highest May. June, we expect to be very high, if not a record for June. I mean, it's incredible, and I don't think it will stop right on through the election. We see today with the economic numbers and unemployment falling, maybe we're past the worst of the pandemic, but now we have this social unrest from the protests, and I have no problem, obviously, people exercising their First Amendment rights. It's the looting and rioting, that small number of people is causing people to be concerned. You see lines out the door in a lot of cities where this is taking place, people fearful about what might happen. So I think, you're going to see very strong numbers in June as well. And again, we need to engage these people so that they own them responsibly, safely, and that they've now purchased the firearm for self-protection primarily, right? Which is the real core of the Second Amendment, to protect themselves and their family. And they need to help protect that right. Otherwise, people like Mayor Bloomberg and the Brady Center will try to erode and take away those rights any way they can.
Absolutely. Larry Keane with the National Shooting Sports Foundation. Thank you as always, sir, for joining us on the program. It's great talking with you today.
Great to be with you, and hopefully we'll get a little of a baseball season in,
If the players can, figure it out, it looks like that's the stumbling block right now. But if not, maybe we get a little Sandlot team going. Maybe we could meet somewhere in the middle, and you can have NSSF versus the Bearing Arms team, which probably would be unfair because it would be like me and Tom Knighton versus you guys. But I don't know. We'll figure it out, Larry.
Well, I think baseball will be good for the country,
Amen to that. Larry Keane, as always, sir, real pleasure.
Good to see you. Have a great weekend.
So we'll talk with Larry again here, I'm sure, before long. But I also am really, really pleased that Ryan Petty could sit down and spend some time with me today talking about the Supreme Court's decision and what this might mean now in the state of Florida in terms of actually being able to focus on things that do work as opposed to trying to ban our way to safety. Ryan's daughter, Alaina Petty, again, one of the victims in Parkland, Florida, at the shooting at Marjory Stoneman Douglas High School. You might expect that Ryan would be all in favor of banning guns, but he's not. He's actually gone beyond that visceral, emotional reaction of let's just take the guns away and nothing like this would ever happen, to actually focusing on, okay, well, we know that we're never going to take all the guns away. We have a Second Amendment right to keep and bear arms. What can we do that is constitutional, and that is practical and effective to ensure that our kids and our society is safe. Take a look and a listen. I just want to ask, first of all, what's your reaction to the news that, at least for now, gun control advocates are going to have to go back to the drawing board if they want to try to pass this gun ban?
Well, I was ecstatic to hear that the Florida Supreme Court stood firm and upheld the rights of Florida citizens to keep and bear arms. I had a number of problems with this, proposed ballot initiative. It starts with the language around assault weapon. It was overly broad. It would have banned not only the scary black guns that everybody is running around trying to figure out how to get rid of, but also, some common sporting rifles. It was overly broad. In my view, from the beginning, this was a waste of energy and a waste of time. We could have been focused on solutions that would have a meaningful impact on reducing school violence. But this group decides to go off. They felt like they had a mandate to go out and, after the Parkland tragedy, go out and try to ban these scary weapons. In reality, this ban would have done nothing to prevent what happened in Parkland. And unfortunately, it's just going down the wrong path. And I think most thinking people understood that, and I'm glad that the Florida Supreme Court upheld our right to keep and bear arms.
I'm sure that maybe not our audience, but I'm sure if we've got some new folks listening, sure a lot of members of the media would be very surprised to hear you say what you just said, because the typical I think attitude from the media is that those like you who are most impacted by these tragedies should come down on the side of more gun control laws. They should be out there calling for gun bans. And yet, as you say, you think that this takes us away from the direction that we need to be going. So if not banning guns, if not gun control, what do you think the answer is, and where do you think we should be looking to try to make schools safer and to try to reduce violence?
Well, yeah, I mean, I think the presumption is that every victim of or victim's family of these kinds of tragedies is automatically pro Second Amendment or pro gun control initiatives, and that's simply not true. The vast majority of the families, I think, have been looking for, and this is always loaded language, so I use it very carefully, but reasonable solutions, right? And we know that the majority of these firearms that are used in school shootings come from home. So what are some things that we can do to help people understand the importance of the responsibility that they have in keeping and bearing arms and doing that safely, while at home? So storing them safely. There are a lot of things that we can do to sort of get at the problem, but that's only part of the problem. The real failures in Parkland were a lack of understanding the pathway to violence that the shooter was going down from a number of years. I mean, this started in kindergarten. The district failed to do anything about it, and of course, on the day of the tragedy, there were law enforcement failures in the response. So there are other things that we as Americans can all agree on, and I think it's worth our time spending our effort and energy focused on those things that we can agree on and make progress towards. A battle over, the Second Amendment, it just ends in frustration a lot of times for the gun control advocates, because the Second Amendment is such an important backstop and such an important protection that we end up, at each other's throats, so to speak, going after this right that's enshrined in the Constitution. It's not productive, number one, and number two, it's not effective. This would not have stopped Parkland.
Are you, none of this is happening in a vacuum. We're obviously watching the unrest that is taking place in cities across the country right now. You've seen the images of business owners who are armed and they're guarding their shops. You've seen the news that we've had an estimated 2 million Americans become gun owners for the first time just over the past few months. And so again, as you talk about, what's effective and then what's practical. I think that you're right. I think that, going down the road of we got to try to ban our way to safety, I don't think either one of those things is practical or effective. But one of the other things that we're starting to see now, Ryan, is, this push to defund police. And I don't know how serious that proposal is. And, we're talking about, I guess, Minneapolis City Council is meeting today to look at ways to actually dismantle and disband their police department and replace it with something else. But you've already seen, Minneapolis public schools have ended their contract with the Minneapolis Police Department. You've got others around the country who are talking about removing school resource officers from campus. I'm curious to get your take on that. Is that a good idea or a bad idea, getting police officers out of schools?
Let me say this, Cam, to the parents in Minneapolis and the parents in Portland that care about the safety and well-being of your children, pull them out of those school districts immediately. I can't be any more firm in my warning to you. The last line of defense for your kids in those public schools was that school resource officer. Now, that school resource officer failed in Parkland. But notwithstanding that failure, they are the last line of defense, and they're an integral part of the threat assessment team that should be operating in those schools. And without that input from law enforcement and without that gun on campus, your child's life is at risk. If I lived in Minneapolis or Portland, my kids, I would pull them out of school immediately. I can't be any more clear about that.
I know you can't. I mean, that's crystal clear. And this is something that you're not just talking about from your own personal perspective. I mean, you have been a part of these efforts to look at ways to improve school safety, to make sure that our kids are protected. And so I know that you've been spending probably a little bit more than the past year, I guess, right? Talking with experts, talking with, everybody from the Secret Service on down about ways to identify these threats and then ensure that students and staff, everybody in those schools are safe.
I have, Cam. It really started 3 weeks after the death of, after my daughter, Alaina, was killed in Parkland. We passed legislation in Florida, comprehensive legislation, which did have some gun control measures in it. And I know are not popular, and I know they're still under debate. And that will be, I think, adjudicated through the course of the next few months and years. However, on balance, what we looked at was the mental health of students, and we looked at school safety measures that could be used to prevent these tragedies. And we didn't just look at Parkland, we've looked at everything. Now, I sit on a commission investigating the tragedy, and I sit with a lot of wonderful people that are stakeholders in this. And the conclusions we've come to was that you need, look, a good friend of mine, Sheriff Brady Judd here in Polk County, said, also a member of the commission, when seconds count, minutes don't matter. And these public attacks on shopping malls and schools and businesses tend to last less than a couple of minutes. Law enforcement simply can't respond quickly enough. So if you don't have a way to stop the threat on the premise, on the school campus, at that public space, if you will, you're not going to stop it. Law enforcement is going to get there too late. People are going to lose their lives. So I have been pushing for getting rid of this concept of gun-free zones at school. We should have firearms readily available, and those that are willing to go through the training and the background checks to carry firearms on our school campuses should be allowed to do so. And that's what we did here in Florida, and it's having a positive impact. Our schools in Florida are no longer a soft target.
Absolutely. Again, talking with Ryan Petty. And Ryan, last question for you. If these gun control advocates decide, okay, we're going to come back, we're going to rewrite this language where we're going to try to get this on the ballot in 2022. I mentioned earlier that, they failed to collect enough signatures to get on the ballot this year. Is this simply an unpopular idea in Florida?
I'm happy to say it is unpopular. Clearly, they didn't get anywhere near the signatures that were required. And that wasn't because the language is unclear. So, look, I don't want to give them any advice. Either they were advised poorly, they had poor legal representation, or they're just, not very good at grammar. But the idea that these weapons would not be grandfathered past the present owner, I think, was not a mistake. I think they intentionally had that language in there. I think it was meant to be deceptive. But regardless of the language that was in this measure, this is unpopular in Florida, and I'm happy to say that. It's time for those of us that care about our rights and care about the Second Amendment to continue to stand for what we know is right. And quite frankly, I think some of the rioting and looting that we've seen over the past week, and again, I'll separate it very, very much from the peaceful protesters that were out there to demonstrate against what we saw happen to George Floyd in Minneapolis. I think those protesters were out there exercising their First Amendment rights, and we all support that. And I think the country was united in its disgust over what we saw on video in Minneapolis. But the looting and rioting that happened after, I've seen some folks say that they think that sent the gun control movement back 30 years. Let's hope that that's true, because I think every American seeing that lawlessness realizes that it's more important than ever to protect that Second Amendment right.
Absolutely. Ryan, my friend, it is always good talking with you. Thank you so much for coming on the show today, and I look forward to doing this again very, very soon. That is going to do it for this edition of Bearing Arms Cam and Company. Just a program note. I am scheduled to be off next Monday and Tuesday. We've got some doctor stuff to do with my wife, but if there is some breaking news, for instance, the Supreme Court is considering in conference this week almost a dozen cases dealing with the Second Amendment. Next Monday morning, they will be releasing orders from that conference, and so we could see the Supreme Court take one of these cases. They've been considering these Second Amendment cases for several weeks now, and it's still my gut feeling that they're going to take at least one of them. I don't know when, and I don't know what case or cases they'll take, but we could get word on Monday morning. If that happens, I'll do my best to rearrange my schedule, get to the studio. We'll have analysis and updates on that if it happens on Monday. If not, I will see you back here on Wednesday. Have a great weekend. Thank you for being a part of the program today. Don't forget, you can subscribe to Town Hall Media on YouTube, or you can subscribe to Bearing Arms Cam and Company on Apple Podcasts or other fine podcast platforms. You can also become a VIP member of Bearing Arms or a VIP Gold member of Town Hall Media, and that way you get exclusive analysis, commentary, live chats, and more. We'll be doing another one of those next week as well. But until we talk again, be safe, be well, be free. And we'll see you soon with another edition of Bearing Arms Cam and Company.